The poem Whoso Lists to Hunt by Sir Thomas Wyatt is very often studied, and that's in part because it's one of the first sonnets in the English language, but also because Sir Thomas Wyatt gives us a very interesting and powerful perspective on the court life under King Henry VIII. And so we'll talk both about the form of the poem, what goes into it, and also about the drama that is part of what is being described here. Before we get to Whoso Lists to Hunt, however, we should have a quick look at the poem that inspired Sir Thomas Wyatt, and this is Sonnet 190 by the Italian poet Petrarch. So Petrarch was writing in the 14th century, and he was writing sonnets to a woman named Laura. And Laura seems to be alluded to here in this poem as well, in the reference to the laurel's shade. This poem is very much what we might call a dream vision. It's a kind of allegorical dream vision, dream vision, in which every detail somehow seems symbolic. We have a white hind, a deer, 2 gold horns, green grass, 2 streams, it's springtime. Everything somehow seems to have some symbolic resonance. If you look, for instance, at this idea of the 2 streams, it seems like the hind, the deer, is in some kind of paradise-like setting between 2 streams. If we think of the Garden of Eden set between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, as has often been suggested, then we can see that the poet, who is not between these 2 rivers, is quite distant. Okay, the hind is inaccessible. The second set of 4 lines here refers to the poet or the speaker as a miser, as somebody who hoards money, who is guilty of avarice. And this introduces the idea of sin. So there's a theological aspect to this poem that you will not find to the same extent in Wyatt's poem. Wyatt's poem is much more secular in a sense. It doesn't focus on this theological angle very much. So Petrarch is unable to get to this hind, and in fact there is written on a collar around her neck, "Touch me not. It pleased my Lord to set me free." We don't know who this Lord is, but it could be her husband. It could also, however, be God, right? If she is meant for some special purpose, if she's supposed to be chaste, let's say, then it's possible that this is a message that Petrarch is not to have her. And finally, as a result, he falls into the water, which is somewhat comical, and she vanished. She's gone. And it's almost as if the vision, the dream, vanishes with this as well. So that should give us some context then for Wyatt's poem. Let's go back here now, and the first thing we should talk about really is the form of this poem. What kind of a form are we talking about here? First of all, we know it's a sonnet, so it has 14 lines, but the rhyme scheme, even though it's similar to what Petrarch gives us, is a little bit different. When you compare the Petrarchan sonnet with the Shakespearean sonnet, which comes later, of course, and then you compare that with what Wyatt is doing, you can see that Wyatt is closer to the Petrarchan sonnet, where we have an octave, the first 8 lines, and a sestet, and the poetic turn, the moment of dramatic reversal, or the movement towards the conclusion, tends to come between the octave and the sestet, whereas with Shakespeare it comes typically later, just before the rhyming couplet. What you can see here then is that Wyatt tends to follow Petrarch, but he does add that rhyming couplet, and so there's more of an emphasis on being witty and clever at the end, and that kind of foreshadows what we eventually get with Shakespeare. Another thing we can talk about here is the meter. So what kind of rhythm do we have here? And when we're talking about Petrarch, Petrarch tends to use hendecasyllabic meter, so hendecasyllabic. It's a hard word to say, but all it means is that there are 11 syllables per line, and Wyatt is starting to move us closer to iambic pentameter. So iambic pentameter, which is that pa-pum, pa-pum, pa-pum rhythm, and we have 10 syllables per line. Of course, he doesn't do this entirely consistently. First of all, the iambic stress is very irregular. You can probably hear that if you say it, right? It's not whoso, list to. It's off right from the beginning. But also some of the lines aren't exactly regular. So if you look, for instance, at line 1 and 13 and 14, okay, so the last couple of lines as well, so 13 and 14, just count them out and see if you can come to 10, because I don't think it quite works. What you can say then about that is that maybe this is Wyatt experimenting with a new form and he doesn't quite get it, and it's very rough. Or you could say, well, no, he's trying to play with it and he really wants to mimic the natural speech accents of the English language, and so it seems very authentic and conversational, and he aims to do this. There's lots of disagreement about this among scholars, whether this is accidentally bad or whether it's on purpose and really gives us a sense of a colloquial kind of voice. Okay, one more thing we can talk about in terms of form, and that's this use of what's called the caesura. So the caesura is a break in the middle of a line. And you can see that quite a bit in this poem. There's quite a few lines that seem to break in the middle, right? You can see it in the rhyming couplet, for instance. But the most important one is right in the middle, where he says, fainting I follow, I leave off therefore. And that caesura, I think, is especially important because that seems to be where he breaks from what came before and he starts off with a new direction, with a new point to make. To give you the political background next to this poem is probably about Anne Boleyn, a woman that Sir Thomas Wyatt was in love with. The problem for him was that King Henry VIII, starting in the 1520s already, was also in love with Anne, and eventually he ended up marrying her. However, in 1536, he had Anne arrested and then executed, and Wyatt himself went to prison as well, and it's even possible that he watched her execution from prison. That means then that courting her, pursuing her, must have been very dangerous, and that's what this poem is about. In this poem then, everything is about movement, whereas Petrarch's dream vision is much more static. Here we have Wyatt hunting for the deer, and he's trying to pursue her just as King Henry VIII is doing as well. We read then, whoso list to hunt, I know where is an hind. And this word list means likes or desires to. If you want to go hunting, I can tell you where there's a deer. But as for me, hélas, or we would say alas, I may no more. The vain travail hath wearied me so sore, I am of them that farthest cometh behind. I'm so tired, I'm the last in the party, and the word vain here, which is repeated later, means kind of useless or empty. So it's an empty pursuit. Yet may I by no means my wearied mind draw from the deer. So I'm still obsessed about her, I can't withdraw myself, I can't stop thinking about her, but as she fleeth afore, fainting I follow. And this is such a great line because you get these repeated F's here, you get this alliteration, okay, across the line break, and you can almost hear him panting, right? Fleeth afore, fainting I follow. And then we get that caesura, and you can probably see the significance symbolically because he says, I leave off therefore. Well, he is leaving off with the line. He doesn't even make it halfway across the line before he needs to take a breath, before he needs to stop. And that signifies the fact that he can no longer pursue her. He writes then, I leave off therefore, since in a net I seek to hold the wind. This is an image he borrows from Petrarch, this idea that capturing the wind in a net is useless, and you might as well try to pursue this deer. Who list her hunt, we repeat our initial line, who wants to hunt her, I put him out of doubt. Right? I will confirm to him, I'll make sure that there's no doubt about this, as well as he may spend his time in vain. Just like me, you can hunt for all you want to, but it's going to be a vain pursuit. And now we get that image of what's written on the collar around her neck, and it says noli me tangere, which is Latin for do not touch me. Do not touch me. For Caesar's I am. And this reference to Caesar makes it very clear that Caesar is the emperor, or in this case the king, King Henry VIII. I belong to Caesar, and wild for to hold, though I seem tame. Now this last line is fascinating because perhaps this is also a reference to the fact that even Caesar cannot tame the deer. And so far, if we're thinking about how the woman, how Anne Boleyn is portrayed in the sonnet, she seems to lack agency. But the final line does raise the question, is she wild? Is she independent? Does she have any power of her own? And maybe this is saying even to the king, you will not be able to tame her. It's hard to say. So that is the poem Whoso List to Hunt, one of the finest early sonnets in the English language, and I hope that you've now understood how it relates also to its political and historical background.